Well, good morning. Are you ready? Are you excited? Today we're going to do something different. And man, I love our church. I appreciate the diversity and different voices we have. That, Capital has a rich heritage and a continuing legacy. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. If you're a part of the panel, the rest of you who haven't had a chance to make your way up here, please go ahead and take that moment. There's some chairs. Oh man, we're going to be segregated. This is like junior high. I didn't realize that. Ellen, are you coming? All right. Ooh, do I get to be next to my whiff? You're going to be farthest away from me? Ugh. I got dissed, burned by my own whiff. All right. Hey, do you guys realize, though, Capital, that we have a rich heritage, 74 years, almost 75 years, but we also have a continuing legacy. God has been spurring in us a fresh vision, a fresh excitement, a fresh level of impact. And a key part of that is what we'll call multi-generational ministry. That might be a word you've heard. That might be a word you're like, what does that mean? MGM, is that a movie studio? Well, that's what we want to unpack today. What is it? What is it that God's actually called us to and bless us because we've figured it out and are following Him? And so, yet at the same time, there is tension that we will face as we realize this vision. This is something God's called us to, and we'll unpack that. Yet we also are going to talk about the tension we'll face if we're truly intergenerational, multi-generational ministry. And so, instead of just my voice this morning, you have some incredible people who are going to share with you. The first is Ellen. Oh, come on. This is rock star Ellen. Vicky. She's a part of our kids ministry. Morgan, my wife. Warren, who is a part of Northwest Baptist Convention College Ministry down in Eugene. Rob, high school teacher. An all-around amazing guy. He's also part of the young adult small group leader. And Josh, who also is part of our youth ministry. And so we're going to just dive right in. We've got 7 questions. A few of them are going to answer each question. I might share a few things. And here we go. What is multi-generational ministry? I mean, what is that? Is that just a fancy word? Is that a new church trend? What is multi-generational ministry?
Is this on? Yep. Okay. To me, multi-generational ministry is where you have different age groups who are meeting with each other. So you might have people from the 60s to 80s group and people from the middle-aged group, 40 to 70, whatever. And then, even younger, just gleaning off of each other and learning together and learning to minister together.
So I always like to say that ministry, words matter a lot to me. And so ministry means ministering to people's needs, meeting needs, right? And so multi-generational ministry looks at, hey, what are the different life needs that you have? What are the different spiritual needs that you have at various stages of your life? Kids are going to have a very different spiritual need, life need than young adults who are getting their job for their first time versus our more elderly people in our congregation who have already lived through a lot of those experiences. Everybody has needs. The question is, how are we meeting those? And are we only focusing on one generation like the kiddos and ignoring everybody else's needs? And so, like Dan said, I work with college students, and so one thing I point out to college students is to meet other people's needs, you recognize your own strength. And so looking and seeing what part of the body of Christ you are is really helpful there. And one thing I tell college students a lot is if you haven't had knee replacements yet, if you haven't had a hip replacement yet, most likely the part of the body you are is the muscle. And so if chairs need to be set up in the morning, if someone needs help cleaning out gutters or moving into a different apartment or house, you're the first to volunteer because you've got the youth and energy to do it. And so figuring out what part of the body you are and then what the needs of other people in the body are is really helpful towards actually reaching people's needs, which is multi-generational ministry in my mind.
So multi-generational ministry, as we just begin to unpack this, is more of a value. It's more of a perspective, a desire, a philosophy. Multi-generational ministry isn't simply a program. Let's just have this program where we squish everybody together. It's a passion to do life better together amongst a variety of ages. It's an intentionality to connect different ages together, to encourage, to challenge, to sharpen, to literally be the body of Christ, where we're not just a whole bunch of hands over here and a whole bunch of feet over here, but we are together because God has called us to that. Any other thoughts before we jump into question number 2? So here's why this becomes a concern. How many of you like to be around people like you? Duh. We all do, right? It's normative. It's natural. We walk into a crowd of people and we kind of look around and we're like, are there more people like me? And so, again, being in age-graded programs, ministries, and environments isn't bad. We're not trying to say that, but it's not exclusive. And so we have to kind of go fight that urge to be around people who are just like us, because it's comfortable to be around people just like us. And so that's why the second question matters so much. Does this actually matter to God? Does multi-ministry, does these integrations of relationships and ages actually matter to God? Or is this just a thing we cooked up?
Short answer, yes.
Long
Absolutely.
answer?
Long answer, okay. Really, God is always out there. Our life lesson from this morning from our Sunday school was God will always be willing to run for us as we should be willing to run for God. That same way, God is willing to reach everyone of all ages, no matter who they are or what they are or what their life circumstances are. The fact that multi-generational ministry, to me, little add-on to the first question, is all age groups coming together, regardless of situations, that tells me God is absolutely for that type of ministry.
Good. Other thoughts? Does this matter to God?
Okay, I'll talk. Oh, there we go. You can hear me. One thing, does this matter to God? Yeah, because the church is the bride of Christ, and the church is composed of multi-generations. So yes, of course it's important to God, because no matter what stage we're at right now, we're going to be in the next stage, and we're going to be in the next stage. All of us are going to progress through all the stages of the multi-generational, and we want to know that we're also still important because we are part of the church. So yeah, it's important both to God, and I think it should be also important to us too.
You can see the verse up on the screen here. I just want you to see this. One generation after another will celebrate your great works. We sang that song today. They will pass on the story of your powerful acts to their children. Your majesty and glorious splendor have captivated me. I will meditate on your wonders, sing songs of your worth. We confess there is nothing, no one greater than you, God, nothing mightier than your awesome works. And I will tell of your greatness as long as I have breath. That's a key reality of we don't just simply tell about God. We pass on. We are passionate to do life in a way that highlights who God is, not just in our group like us, but to the whole body of Christ, the differences of ages. Someone else.
I was struck because I hadn't thought about it in a long time too, but and I'm better with stories than probably straight answers, but when I came to know God, really, I was about 17 years old, and the guys who had taught us about this were all a few years younger than us. They were college guys, or they were, and Rick, who was here, led worship a few months ago. He was a young dad. And so for me, that was what resonated. I had people that were just ahead of where I was at, loved Jesus, and there was something that was different about them, and they were mentors that I could look at, and honestly, they were really, really cool. The depth of it, though, really came from going, I kind of like these guys. They're fun to hang out with. We do cool and crazy stuff together. But at a camp, we had a worship leader. He was a doctor in town. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not, too. Very successful, much older. And when I first met him, there was an awkwardness that I had when I heard his story. He was almost too fired up for God for me. It was like, oh, brother, like, calm down, buddy. And I remember having that initial thought of, like, I get it if you're 22 years old, but you're 62 years old. Like, why would you ever want to come hang out? Why would you want to, like, it didn't make sense to me. There was an awkwardness to it. But the more I hung out with him and the more you saw his heart, you saw that this wasn't going to be a thing for me now. This was going to be a thing, hopefully, the rest of my life. And if that guy was that fired up at that age, at the success that he had, and he wasn't just playing golf or hanging out at the beach house, which he probably could afford to, but he was going to go hang out with a 17-year-old that initially thought, this guy's a weirdo, but loved God so much that started to pour through a thick heart. So I think that's why multi-generational ministry makes sense, because we're doing God for a lifetime.
Yeah, we get to have examples and models of people further down the road than us of what life can be like. Because many of us haven't experienced that. Maybe we didn't grow up in a Christian home, whatever reason. We get to see what can be, what relationships can be, what life can be like.
I really believe that. I don't want to say I believe that, but I think our purpose is to share the gospel of Christ, whether that be with children, with youth, with adults or senior adults. God wants us to share his message and to share his love. Does it matter to God, multi-generational ministry? I think it does, but every ministry matters to God that points to him. And that's what's important, is that we as a church body are pointing to God.
Yeah, going off of what Rob and Vicky said, here's just a few statistics. Just think about it this way. 77% of all people who come to Christ, all believers, all people who have faith, guess what age that happens? 77% of all people who come to Jesus do so before they're 18. That's a significant reality. 95% come to Christ before they're 30. That's a huge reason why multi-generational matters. The examples of older people leaning in and loving and risking back to a younger generation, because that is statistically when people come to Christ. Here's another statistic for you. Gen Z, the younger generation, has a population of 72 million. That's huge. 72 million people are in the Gen Z population, and only about 20% actively engage in a local church. You know what that means? That means 57 million people are unreached. There's a mission field. We're a family on mission. That's why Deuteronomy says it this way, our next scripture, next passage. But watch out. Be careful never to forget what you yourself have seen. Who is God? What's he done in your life? Don't forget. Don't let it fade. Don't let the memory go bye-bye. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live. And be sure to pass them on to your children and grandchildren. Never forget the day when you stood before the Lord your God at Mount Sinai. God's called us to not just pass on what we know, but who we know. Anything else with question 2 before we move on?
I was going to say, I think this not only matters to God, but he actually commands it.
Yeah.
If you want to write down Titus 2:2-8, God tells us that in the body of Christ, those who are older men are to lead and be an example to younger men. Older women are to lead and be an example to younger women. So I would go so far as to say, not only does this matter to God, but he actually expects it of us and commands it of us. So if you're not doing it, not only are you not doing something God said matters to him, but something he told us to do. So for that one.
And again, that's why multi-generational ministry is more than just mixing ages. It's not just say, hey, we're throwing a party or we have a Sunday school and it's anybody, any age. It's the intentionality that we're talking about of building togetherness, of doing life better together and cross-influential relationships. It's not just older teaching younger, although that's absolutely key. It's what can we learn from the younger and older? How can we do these relationships the way God has called us to? How do we make disciples and love one another? Because we need one another, and we're better together. The third question is this. We have 7 of them this morning. Third question is, what are some differences between the generations? What are some differences between the generations? Or to say it this way, why is it hard to be truly intergenerational?
Okay, I'm going to read from my notes so I don't forget anything important. To be intergenerational, here's my story. My grandparents were Jewish. My mother, I'm half Jewish. My mother, being born to my grandparents who were Jewish, they came to the U.S. from Ukraine at the turn of the 20th century, and they had 3 sons. My mother was born in Chicago after they arrived. My grandfather died when I was 8, and I was too young to understand or remember him very much. But my grandmother embarrassed me for most of my teenage life because she talked funny, she spoke Yiddish, she cooked Jewish foods that I didn't understand or didn't like. Because I was a teenager and concentrated on me, totally, I didn't treasure her as I wish I had now. Now I want to know things that I never thought to ask. Why did they leave Ukraine? My husband and I assume it was because of a pogrom, very much like in Fiddler on the Roof, if you're familiar with that. What was life like for her as a teenager? What about her childhood? I never asked. I have some comfort in the fact that my cousin told me some years ago, when I told her this, that I was sad I hadn't ever talked to Grandma. My cousin said, well, they didn't talk about the old days. They didn't talk about the old country. So I think if I had asked, I might have had some answers, but they never just talked about it in general. I don't know if she had siblings. I know she had 2 sisters because my great aunts would join for family events. I don't know anything about her parents, except I do know that her mother, my great-grandmother, did come to the States to visit. She got as far as Ellis Island, and she had pink eye. And they sent her home, and my grandmother never saw her again. But I only know this from my uncle. My grandmother, as I said, never talked about anything like that. Those of us who are on the tail end of our lives, and you will notice that I am the oldest member of this group. You can tell that from the gray hair and the wrinkles. But I'm still alive and well and kicking. So that's important, and I thank God for that. Yes, that I'm healthy enough to be here. But those of us who are at the tail end of our lives don't understand what interests young people. I have to tell you, I have never listened to a Taylor Swift song, and I don't want to. Okay, one church that we had that we went to had luncheons for senior adults and teenagers, and the requirement was that you had to interject each other. In other words, a teenager had to sit by a senior adult. And that was hard. I didn't want to do it, but it was very good. And that's certainly an idea for something that we can do. Being forced to communicate, both groups learned about the other and grew in wisdom and understanding. Many of us have lived the history that teenagers are being taught in school. Okay, I have lived much of that history. I often need help with my cell phone. All I have to do is turn to a teenager or Jeff. It's comforting but embarrassing. On the other hand, I know how to use a rotary phone. I know how to use a wringer washer and hang clothes on a clothesline. I remember 9/11 and Kennedy's assassination. I even remember World War II ending. I have to tell you this quick story. I was 8 years old when World War II ended. That way you can figure out how old I am if you want to. I was on my way home from school and I heard that the war had ended. And my first thought was, yay, no more news.
Your second thought was, yay, I'm going to marry me a soldier.
That's a sailor.
Well, okay.
But my dad always had to listen to the news, and I couldn't listen to my programs. So that was my thinking, that we would have no more news. I thought that was great. But I also remember, as I said, World War II ending, FDR's death. I was actually born on FDR's birthday. My dad sent a letter to him telling him how proud he was because my folks loved FDR. And we did get a letter back from his secretary congratulating my parents on the fact that I was born on his birthday. I remember Truman becoming president. We senior citizens don't get to take courses on the things that interest young people. I don't play video games. I do jigsaw puzzles. I don't watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, and I am shocked that people do. I personally, and I'm ashamed to admit it, I don't know the young people in our church. I don't know the young people's names. That's my fault. In my past, I've taught youth Sunday school classes, and I've led youth groups, but now I'm old, very old, and I've lost touch. So that's my fault. And so, this is kind of a good thing about this whole idea. How can we connect? How can we learn from each other? Do we need to do that? I think we do. And this discussion today may be what it takes to lead us to do that.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate it. We're also missing Linda Warburg, health issues, and Pep, who wasn't able to be here. So we were going to have even a bigger panel. Here's a quick picture for you. Don't play video games? What? So before Josh says something, how many would say that there's differences in the generation? Ellen maybe these differences because you don't raise your hand in church. I don't know. But every single one of us have felt that before. They're too old. They're too young. I don't understand. There's conflict. We can't communicate. They use words that don't make sense. So what does that look like? What are some of those differences? Because if we don't understand those differences, and they are real. They might be hard to understand, but they are real. If we don't understand those differences, it's hard to bridge those relationships. And so, Josh.
That's because you're old, Louis.
Go ahead, Josh. What do you got?
So it's really hard to go after Ellen, who has such an amazing story. That's fantastic. Yeah. For Ellen. And then this picture, I actually saw this picture this morning when I was going through the slides, and it's fantastic. I like this picture a lot because this isn't something that you see. And yet, I can tell you from dealing with the youth on Sunday mornings and dealing with the youth Wednesday nights, this is what they want. They want someone who will sit there with them and play video games. They want someone who will hop online with them. Jamie's not in the room right now, but who will hop online with them and play on a Discord server for Minecraft. They want that. They want that personal connection. And that's what I think we're missing. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily just for the youth, but also for the older generation, for Ellen, for Louis, for Diana, for Jeff, for all those people out there that the youth don't get. Just the same way that we don't get the youth a lot of times, they don't get us either. It's that same disconnect. It's not just the youth. It's not just our generation of people. It's not just Ellen's generation of people. It's all of us. Yep. We have a disconnect because we don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same story.
Well, and relationships start out shoulder to shoulder. You know what I'm saying? You don't start out face to face in intimate conversation. You start out shoulder to shoulder. And for the younger generation, shoulder to shoulder happens with the comfort of technology. It's very different than how the older generation built relationships shoulder to shoulder by go play in the dirt, go, all the things that we used to do, bike ride and have that. So, Warren, you were going to say something?
Yeah, if I could say two things. One, I think that's generally true with the technology, but I think also young people, there's a huge movement in young people, wanting to, admit and say, hey, having technology constantly on us, constantly in your pocket, constantly accessible, is not very good for us, right? There's whole companies that their whole strategy is, how can we, marketed by young people for young people, how can we decrease screen time on your phone and stuff? And so just yesterday, you might notice I'm a little sun right now, took a bunch of college students out on the river. And we had to leave our phones because we're out on the river, and we hopped in tubes and floated for 3 hours and just had conversations about life on the river. Not a single phone pulled out the entire time, right? Just out on the river. And so I think young people do want people who will be next to them playing those fun things, but also I think they're looking for opportunities to have deeper conversations.
You bet.
And if I could also say, one thing that we've noticed in working with college students is that there's different motivations on what you accept as true, right? With a lot of older generations, a lot of what you base on what do I accept as true is evidence-based, right? What is actually true? Can you prove it, right? And I think that's why there is a huge movement in apologetics in these last couple of generations, was because there's so much focus on, can we prove it to be true? And then with a lot of middle-aged people, it's not so much, well, okay, is it just true, but is it actually good? Is it good for me, right? Is it good for my family? Does it work? And so with a lot of middle-aged people, you'll hear a lot of, this is what God has done for me, and this is why I follow God. A lot of personal experience and story. With young people, having so much access to news from all over the world at the same time, various perspectives, it's not only a question of, is God true? Because a lot of people look at God and say, okay, well, even if God is real, he doesn't affirm the things that I want to affirm, so therefore God's not good, and I don't want to follow him. Or even if that's good for you, I don't think that's good for me, and so I don't want to follow that. And so the third category that is really prevalent with young people today that we've really noticed in college ministry is it beautiful, right? Is it attention grabbing? Is it something worth giving my life for? Is God worth it, right? Because it doesn't matter if he's good. It doesn't matter if he's true. He could be true and good, but if he's not captivating, if he's not worth my time, if he's not going to make me feel joy at the end of the day in my life with him, there's not going to be as much motivation to follow him. And so simple apologetics of, hey, we can use the laws of logic to prove that God is real. For a lot of young people, I won't say for everybody because everybody thinks uniquely, but for a lot of the younger generation, it's not enough to prove that God is real. You have to show by how you live and how joyful you are that he's worth following. So if we're looking at differences between generations, that's one thing we've observed as trends in Gen Z.
And I would just, don't let that pass you by. What Warren just said is so critical. The older generation, it's true, therefore it's true. For the younger generation, it's true because I experience it's true. It's true because of the beauty of it. And here's the deal. Every one of you with a little bit of gray, you have a story of how beautiful God is. You have a story of how incredible God carried you through the difficulties of life. That's one of the things that can bridge. Make God personal, not just intellectual.
So hi, my name is Morgan, and I'm middle age, so I'm right between all the old and young people.
Hey, we are Gen X all the way, girl.
I am, fairy tale in. Secondly, that picture that's up there, I'm just going to warn you, that's me and Dan in 30 years. I don't know how they got a picture of us. So going back to what are the differences between generations, and I'm just going to say as someone who's in the middle of everything, something I see a lot of times online and hearing older generation trying to talk about younger and younger trying to talk to older is they don't listen to each other very well, is something I've noticed a lot, especially when I see them trying to talk online. So I see a lot of fear in the next generation, and if you haven't seen that already, start listening. Because for them, they don't see any hope. They don't see a way that they're going to be able to pay off any debt that they accrued to try to get a job, to get a house, to have a family. Their life before them looks like 40 hours of making very little money and hardly being able to live, and there's no hope. That's hard. And when they have the older generation telling them, well, back in my day, if I can just give a piece of advice, don't start your sentences with, back in my day. But listen, but also for the younger generation is that the older generation has wisdom to share. They have been through the Great Depression. They have been through recessions. They have had a lot of stuff going on. It's about learning to respect the other generation, and just because they're younger means they can also be respected, and just because they're older they can be respected too. It's about learning to respect each other. Personally, as someone who's in the middle, I have a hard time because sometimes I don't feel like I fit in with either group. I'm going through things that no one told me about. It sounds weird, but I never had any older people tell me about empty nesting. I don't know if it's an older generation, if you went through this, but I'm going through, everyone my age is trying to find a way to stay young and telling me I need to stay young. And I have no one telling me how to age gracefully. No one's telling me what it's like to go back into the work field after being a mom for 20 to 25 years. So I'm realizing I've never heard anybody talk about this kind of stuff, so I'm starting to try to step up myself and talk to my generation. But I'm realizing when we talk about multi-generation, sometimes we think young and old, and we're not realizing if you count each generation as a span of 10 years, we've got a lot of generations here that are facing different stages of life. And so I like that we're talking about multi-generational ministry, not just because of, I'm looking out at this congregation right now. We got a lot of different ages here and a lot of needs, but also a lot of people that can help with those needs who've been there before. Maybe they've just never talked about it. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm rambling.
So here's what I would say. Track with me. The norm in American churches is consumerism. We don't necessarily want to admit that, but we've absolutely been marketed to that. Go to this church because it has that. Go to this church because whatever, the program, the worship style, the thing for my kids or the thing for my desire. We have marketed church in America towards consumerism all too often. The mixed generation groups get caught up in their own conflicting preferences. This is why we're talking about the differences, because maybe a younger generation wants this type of church and an older generation wants this type of church. That's why there's a graying in churches and a younging in churches, because they separate over their preferences instead of coming together under the mission. You see the difference? Often we divide over the music's too loud, the dress is too casual, the coffee's too hot, you name it. And yet to truly have multi-generational ministry, you have to be convinced it's worth it. Here's what I mean by that. Diversity's always messy. Diversity's always messy until we're in heaven, because Jesus took all that garbage out of us and made it right in the cross. But it takes a commitment that the value of multi-generational ministry outweighs the cost. That's one of the key steps to move forward, a commitment that it's worth the cost. We're not going to divide over the differences, we're going to unite over the mission. And so here's one key thing I want to share with you. If we actually want multi-generational, intergenerational ministry, what has to happen is a seat at the table and a seat in the pew. Here's what I mean by that. When decisions are made about who we are and where we're going, it needs to be multi-generational. If you don't have multi-generational leadership, you will not have a multi-generational church. Make sense? A seat at the table. If we're going to make decisions, multi-generational, not because we're trying to have democratic representation, but because we're trying to understand what God's doing in each unique generation. Not only that, you need to have a seat in the pew. What do I mean by that? Our gathering times relate and connect multi-generationally, not just to one preference or the other, not to just we're going to always do old style music or we're going to have lights and laser show and smoke, again, pejoratively speaking. That's why we need a seat at the table and a seat at the pew. Anything else to share about the differences? And then we're going to combine question 4 and question 5 together for the sake of time. All right, question 4 is this. What are the reasons to be a multi-generational congregation? And question 5 is, what practically can multi-generational ministry look like in a church body? We're going to kind of smush them together. So what is the reasons and what could it look like?
I think one of the reasons a multi-generational congregation is so important is because we can glean off each other. We all have been through something. We've all had struggles. I am in the younger middle-aged group. I'm 43, but I'm a young mom. So it's hilarious to me that sometimes I'm talking to 20-somethings and gleaning from them their information on how to be a mom in this generation, because I wasn't supposed to be a mom in this generation. I was supposed to be a mom for the last generation, but God had other ideas. And so, I have a lot of younger friends who are in their 20s and early 30s, and I just think it's hilarious. But, it's multi-generational, and I need those people. But they also need me, too, because, I have a lot of experience with working with kids as being a teacher, being a children's minister, and things like that. And so that multi-generational congregation, is very helpful in that. And, I think one thing I was talking to Brian about this while going through questions, and it creates empathy, learning the struggles that our older generation has gone through, World War II and, the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that, and segregation, for goodness sakes. These people have been through it. They know, but, also, sharing our stories with each other, having that time to do that. That helps us to, oh, goodness. My brain is not working properly. It creates empathy for each generation, for the children and the youth to hear our stories, but for us also to hear their stories. They're going through things too that we couldn't even imagine. And by joining them in their activities and joining them at their level, helps to create that empathy between each other. Does that make sense in any way?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's what I got.
So I just learned a lesson in real time that I didn't know, because Dan said, "Are you ready for the multi-generational panel this morning?" And I said, "Multi-what-a-hana-what-a?" And I went, "Oh yeah, that thing I was going to do too." So I was lucky enough just to come back from a week in New Orleans, history of World War II museum. Spoiled brat. I got a chance to go down there, learn, fly down there, all that fun stuff too. But I don't know if you guys remember last week we had this big computer outage that was going on. And I was supposed to be the first one that showed up to this conference, which was perfect for me, because you guys know me. I'm not like antisocial at all. I ended up not being the first one to show up. I ended up being the last one to show up and a day late. And so you had a congregation of people who had gotten together from all over the country to talk about World War II and how to teach it better. I instantly went from, I'm ready to set up and be Rob, and hi, it's nice to meet you, to a group of people who had already met each other for a day and a half, and my instant response was, I don't want to get to know you, because I'm late and you guys have already got together. There was a guy who is probably 5-6 years older than me. He made sure that I got connected with the group. In fact, he was obnoxious about it. Like, "Rob, you're coming." He was from Kentucky. He's like, "Rob, you're coming out with us tonight." And I was like, "Yes, Darren from Kentucky, who I met 2 minutes ago." But if it was left up to me, I don't meet Darren, and I don't meet the people that he's kind of collected, and we don't have that exchange of ideas. And they don't ask me about Oregon and how beautiful it is and what they have to do when they come out here. And so for me, that's a real practical application that God's working in real life. It's not working in a Sunday morning. Well, yeah, I take that back. Working on a Sunday morning for sure with us all sitting here, but it's practical. It works day to day to day. And by the end of that week, we're talking about Jesus around a table in the middle of the French Quarter. And you're like, surrounding us is the French Quarter in New Orleans. But we're talking about Jesus and having gumbo at the
Don't
same
Google
time.
that, by the way.
Yeah. To people from the Bronx, and a new teacher from Pittsburgh who had hope because he didn't see a bunch of burned out, tired teachers. So God's doing things all the time like this. It's just really interesting that, at least for our church, we want to be able to say that with things of God, we're learning in this kind of same way. I mean, World War II is amazing. I really, really think it's interesting. But to learn more about God from, a brother deacon like Bob Warburg, who's not here, and still see that it's so needed. It's so valuable for us.
Well, that's because we ultimately have to embrace the value of reaching forward and risking back. Reaching forward and risking back. People are reaching forward. Hey, come on, let's go. And reaching back. What were you going to say, Paul?
Funny enough, I'm from the New Orleans area. I grew up going to that museum countless times. Can't even count how many times I've been there. So I really had a mental image as you're telling that story. I think the second question that Dan had asked was, what can it practically look like in our church today? If I can share 2 scriptures with you that really talk on that. The first one, both of these are going to be really easy to remember because it's the same number just repeated over and over. It's 2 Timothy 2:2. And in it, Paul is talking to Timothy, and he says, what you have seen in me, I want you to entrust to other men who can also teach others. So you see 4 generations of a pass down happening. You've got Paul, you've got Timothy watching Paul. Timothy entrust to faithful men who are able to teach others. All right, and that's kind of the vision that Paul has, is we watch how somebody else does life. And actually that brings us to the second verse. I think this is the clearest picture of discipleship. It's 1 Corinthians 11:1. So like I said, it's the same number just repeated over and over. 1:1. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. You watch how someone else imitates Christ. You be a model of imitating Christ for someone else to watch, like Timothy watched Paul. And the guys, that takes time together. You can't imitate somebody that you're never with, right? Someone can't imitate you from a distance. You've got to open up and let them imitate you. So there's that imitation, that time together, that watching. But 2, you've got to actually entrust. And I'm going to speak generally. I'm not a member of this congregation. I live down in Eugene. It'd be quite a drive to make it up here every week, right? Generally, in church world, we don't do entrusting very well. Our time as a Sunday school teacher has come, and we do a good job, and then, hey, life changes, something happens, I'm going to step down. We don't do a good job of entrusting someone new. We don't do a good job of teaching the next generation, the next person who's going to fill that spot behind us, how to do that. We just step out and say, well, someone's going to step up. Or even at the pastoral level, there's whole agencies built around this idea of pastoral search teams. We've kind of treated it like corporate America, where pastors just say, hey, I feel like God's calling me somewhere else. And they step down with no exit plan, with no, hey, I've trained up this next person to take over after me. Hey, Moses trained up Joshua to take over after him. Elijah trained up Elisha to take over after him. Jesus trained the 12 apostles to take after him. We don't do that anymore. We just step out and say, someone's going to step in. There's not that entrusting of new leadership, right? And how does that entrusting happen? It happens by imitate me for a period, right? Joshua had to follow Moses around. I don't know if you guys noticed this. When Moses went up Sinai, Joshua went up with him, right? Everywhere that Elijah walked, Elisha walked with him. Jesus invited, particularly his 3 closest disciples, into very intimate spaces with him so they could imitate him perfectly when he was gone. And so when we do that in trusting, I think that's where that can really practically look like. Not just how can I do my job right now, but how can I invite someone who I could see a lot of potential in doing well next time to come imitate me as I do this now. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, you guys have heard me say this many times already just in the last 9 months, but we loved you so much, 1 Thessalonians 2:8. We loved you so much that we not only shared the gospel of God, but our lives as well. That's what we're talking about. We do life better together. We do life invested with one another. We recognize the older people have such wisdom and experiences, trials and difficulties that God's walked through them. They get to pass that down. They get to pass that and share that. And yet younger people have a level of vitality and faith. They're asking questions we may have stopped asking. There's a sense of sparking new discoveries from younger people and seeing the steady course from older people. It's just we absolutely need one another. And so just a couple thoughts for you that I don't want you to miss this. We need to be able to build bridges. And the way we build bridges isn't simply the way you used to build bridges. We got to figure that out. And a huge part of that is sharing our lives with love. The younger generation is worn out on agendas, on fake, and on aggression. And yet I think because the older generation is also worn out, we just don't see each other as well as we can. We don't care about each other as well as we can. And that's the goal of love, to love like we have been loved. That's what Jesus tells us about making disciples, loving one another. Other thoughts? Someone picked up a mic. I wasn't sure.
I was also going to say something really quick, but both Warren and Dan have now taken my thunder. I was going to talk about the practicality of a mentorship. That's exactly what Warren has talked about, exactly what Dan just said. It's really just making sure that we have that mentorship, that we do that right. Because it can be done wrong, trust me. It can be done wrong. But making sure we have those Jesus-centered, those God-centered people mentoring the next generation. Like Jesus did for the apostles and the apostles did for the disciples who went across all nations. That's why we talk about Jesus today. But yeah, that mentorship is really very important, especially in a multi-generational ministry.
Yeah.
And the question is, what practically can multi-generational ministry look like in the church today? One of the things that I think that we do well at, when I came here 9 years ago, I was slid into a classroom with people from all different walks of life, from empty nesters to having babies, to middle-agers. Everybody was there, and everybody had a say. Everybody, if you had an issue, there was someone who was already been there and done that and would speak it. And that meant so much to me. I never wanted to miss Sunday school. I mean, seriously, Sunday school was my favorite part of coming to church because I knew I was going to meet with my friends who have either been there, done that, or who needed me, for something. Maybe I had a hint of advice or, and that was just something that, for the last 9 years I've treasured. And when I had to go and teach Sunday school, I was very sad because I loved my Sunday school so much, but I knew I had to go and share too, with our younger generation. And so, in which I still do that as well. But I think that that's one way we can do it. Maybe not during Sunday school, maybe during Sunday school, whatever. But mixing together instead of being apart, because we've all been somewhere. We've all done it, something. And we can share that information, that what we've learned. Something that I always bring up in Sunday school teaching is, and you read it in Deuteronomy, I think, earlier, where the parents and the grandparents are supposed to tell the children the stories of what happened to the Hebrew people, to them. And those stories were supposed to go down from generation to generation to remind them that God is there and God is working. And we must trust in God and obey God for him to protect us and be with us. And, those things were passed down from generation to generation. And we need to do that now too. And I think one good way to do that is by mixing the ages, not separating us, because we all have something good to say. We all have something to share with each other. And I think that's definitely something that has benefited me for the last 9 years, because I didn't have that in other churches that I had been to before. It was always, this is your age group, and you must stay with your age group. And, my grandma's over here in her age group with all the 80 and 90-year-olds, and, the kids are over here. But I think mixing us is something that, in some way, in some purpose, is a great way to start.
Yeah, and we said this at the beginning. It's intentionality of relationships. So hear me. We have to have an intentionality of relationships here at Capitol, but don't miss this. If multi-generational will not happen if it only happens in this building. Multi-generational happens because you have people over for dinner. Multi-generational happens because you're going on a trip. Multi-generation happens because you do life better together, that you play together, provide for one another, and you show off Jesus. So if multi-generation doesn't happen outside, it must happen outside this building, not just in this building. Did you have something before we move on? All right. The sixth question. Sixth question is this: why do young people not participate in ... Why do young people not participate in? And it's whatever the in is, what I like, what I want them to do. Why do young people not do what I'm not sure we're going to take questions. We're already running short. So text me if you need to. Jeff can give you my text and I can read it. Why do young people not participate in fill in the blank?
So I actually talked to some young people, and I asked them, and this was the response. Sometimes young people see older people who go to church because they always went to church, because that's part of their generation, but it doesn't seem like they want to be there. It's a duty versus desire. The biggest thing that young people, and even us middle-aged people, are looking at is for authenticity, that we see joy on your face when we walk in the doors and we're like, oh man, this is what I literally think in my head when I meet some of you guys, because some of you guys are really cool. I want to be like them when I'm their age. So I just want to say, this is just a little note. You guys are really cool. When we were telling people that God was calling us to this church here, we said, but the old people are really cool here. So I am saying this was something that, having been in many different churches, that some young people that I talked to had noticed, is they said sometimes it just doesn't look like the old people want to be there. They just go because that's what they've always had to do. And one way to really reach the young generation is just to have a vibrant relationship with Jesus Christ yourself. And just want to tell you a little story. Rob got to tell a story. He was at a cool place last week, and I was at a cool place last week. I was hanging out with 500 people that want to write Christian science fiction and fantasy, and 2/3 of that group is under the age of 30. And if you want to reach the next generation, you have to hang out with the next generation. That's also, if you want to reach non-Christians, you have to hang out with non-Christians. And Dan gave some really scary statistics that it sounds like the next generation isn't really interested in God or Jesus. They're hungry for spiritual things. Absolutely. That's part of the reason my genre that I write in, fantasy and science fiction, is growing exponentially, because it's a place where people feel safe to explore spiritual issues, and they are open to hearing about God in a different world, and then realizing that God is in this world too. So that's why I write what I write. But I just wanted to encourage you that it's not all doom and gloom. There are young people that are passionately wanting to follow God. And if you want to make it so young people, the question, why do young people not participate? If you want them to participate yourself, and show that vibrant relationship you have with God every morning when you see you. And it's not just, oh, hi, glad you're here this morning, but they can tell the fake smile and the real smiles. So,
anyone else? Why do the young people not participate in fill in the blank?
I would like to share too, just based off that, right? Again, a good example of young people are motivated by beauty, right? You can't just be coming here. You have to be joyful with it if you're going to be sharing it. With young people, a lot of times with younger generations, like I work with college students, we'll say Gen Z. With that, when we share the gospel a lot of times for the first time, we're talking about vague concepts like sin that maybe they have no experience with, have no conviction over. Jesus saves you from sin. I didn't even know sin was a problem, so why should that motivate me? But I think one thing that can be useful, and one thing we've found a lot of momentum with, there's 3 things that young people today are just across the board struggling with. Anxiety is through the roof, depression is through the roof, and loneliness is through the roof. And I'm sure those 3 things are interconnected. Those things are not 3 separate things. Really, it's a 3-headed monster, right? Guys, the good news is the gospel addresses each of those things, right? The gospel, can I get an amen? The gospel addresses each of those 3 things that young people are so desperately struggling with. And so when sharing the gospel, when inviting someone for the first time to participate, right, the pitch isn't, hey, come to this because it's going to solve a problem that you didn't even know you had. Although, to be clear, I'm not saying we ignore sin, we don't preach on sin, we don't talk on sin. I'm not saying that at all. But you also have to realize that that's not the thing that's going to most motivate them or the thing that they're most worried about, right? And so you address the sin issue. You address, hey, there is something that was paid for on the cross. Because the second you stop talking about the sin, the cross means nothing, right? We must talk about sin, but we can't only talk about that. We must talk about the new life and the new beauty that comes after the cross, right? What comes after the cross is just as important, because that's when we find transformation and healing from anxiety, from depression, from loneliness. So that's one thing we've found helpful on the college campus as we share the gospel.
Deal. Before we hit our last question, there's one thing I want to highlight. One of the areas that can be hard to bridge is what I call form versus function. Form versus function, or why versus what. Or maybe you've heard it as purpose versus practice. And that's really it. Young people want to know, why does this matter? What's the meaning behind this? What's the purpose? And sometimes older people, we've gotten so used to doing it this way, we aren't open to doing it a different way that still has the same purpose. You track with what I'm saying? And when we just tell people you have to do it this way without a connection to why it matters this way, it will be disconnecting for them. But when we take them on the journey of why it matters, the why before the what, the purpose before the practice, the function before the form, it helps connect with people. And so sometimes younger people don't attend or connect or do something because they don't see the value in it like you did. They just see what they have to do, and they don't necessarily want to do it because there's no connecting tissue to it. There's no connecting value to it. All right, we ready for the last and final question? I know we're running a little late. Ready? Question number 7, the final one. What can I do next? What can I, as a person here at Capitol, as a member of this church, do next?
Get involved.
What?
Get involved. Find a group. Doesn't matter what group. Older, younger, middle-aged, doesn't matter. Get involved. That's what you can do next.
August 15th, come to a training on how to reach college students. Even if you're not interested in reaching college students, this is a great training on how to, that entrusting principle that we talked about. How do you entrust something to someone else? So if you want to learn how to make a disciple, even if it's not college students, August 15th.
God calls each of us to serve him and to go and tell others about him. And the next thing that you need to do and that I need to do is to figure out, where is God leading you? You know, what group? Do you like kids? Do you like youth? Do you like adults? We need help in all of these areas. Do you like babies? You know, there is a place for you in this church to serve. And if you need help with figuring out where that is, there's a whole bunch of people in here, up here on the stage and out there in the room, that can help you find that niche for you, you know, and to find where you're going to best serve. So just ask. Join, ask.
And I have one more thought. Multi-generational doesn't just happen inside the walls of the church. It happens in your workplace, because you're probably working with people who are older and younger than you. It starts in your neighborhood and the people that you know. You want to see not just working in your church, but let's have more younger and older people in these empty chairs that we have around us. And that starts with the people we already know outside the church and listening to them. Also online, you know, don't just be nice and happy in the church, but outside the church too. Be your authentic, vibrant self.
Melody and I have a unique opportunity to be able to help out with college and career kiddos who you don't see a ton of all the time. But for whatever reason, God has put it in front of us and put it on our hearts to be able to host and to be able to lead in a small way what we thought was just going to be a kind of a Bible study that's grown and it's grown a little bit. We're going to take a little bit of a breather at the moment. But when you say ask and get involved, I'm not great at asking for help. If you needed help like moving today, I could probably show up with a truck. But I have an issue where I don't tend to ask for help very well. That group needs your help. I can tell, like you were saying before, with hopelessness. Food that you'd make. Our food always gets eaten. Space that you can provide, ways that you can pray. Come hang out with us. I know that those are things that are happening right now today. We do have a ministry to college kiddos that could use things that I can't even imagine right now. God might put something on your heart that's like, hey, Rob, we need blah, 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 blah. I'm like, sweet, I never thought about that. I'm dim-witted anyway. But yeah, there are ways right now today to get involved.
Absolutely.
That's exactly the point, too. Is get involved doesn't necessarily mean you have to show up at a group. You can get involved in all kinds of ways. There's meals. We have college kids going off to college who don't have stuff that they need for college, right? Parents are not always able to provide the things that kids need, and a lot of times that need falls on the kid to find a way to make those things happen. There are needs everywhere. The thing is ask, get involved, do those things. That's really it.
I want to wrap up with this thought. The older generation, and this will maybe step on some toes, the older generation must find joy in passing off leadership to the next generation. The older generation must find joy in passing off leadership to the next generation. Find joy in seeing the next generation live the gospel because they're sharing, I don't mean just with words, but with their lives, the gospel. To let go of any part of the past that's become an idol. To let go of any part of the past that's become an idol. Again, don't mishear me in what I'm not saying. Keep tracking. But there is a need to let go of control. And some of that need to have to share what God's done over the years. To move towards a Jesus-centric value of empowering others and what He has done through us to His glory. And younger people, the younger generation, need to identify the real and meaningful struggle older people endure. The constant sense of loss. The loss of career, the loss of loved ones, the loss of mobility, the loss of understanding how things work, like certain technology. Loss of control of their lives, knowing that they face an ever potentially declining future of less independence and more reliance on others. Young people need to show an overwhelming amount of compassion, letting go of control, living out compassion to older people, and walk with them through the difficult stage of life. So your action steps, what's next? Here's what I would encourage you. Just be open and honest. Do you believe in multi-generational ministry? Are there some blocks, some hindrances, some struggles, some idols that God would identify? Are you open to what God would have next? To love people right where they're at, younger or older? To share your story, to make much of Jesus, that we would be on mission together because we are better together. We're a body and a family. I want to just show this last slide. As Brian comes up to lead us in our final song, would you thank the panel? Worship team's coming up. Panel, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. I want to just take a moment to pray, and then we'll sing our last song. But read this on the screen. If you can't read it, check it out later. It'll be back up. Oh, we can leave that. Well, all right, let me just pray. God, there's a lot of content. We've been drinking from a fire hose. There's so much going on, and yet we just don't want to miss your voice. We don't want to miss what you have. You've clearly told us how much the next generation, each generation, matters. And yet, often our marketed and our social media isolates us and puts it at odds with each other instead of into one another. And so, God, may this be a moment that you birth something significant, something eternal. Because we know that every culture, every nation, every generation who knows you and trusted you will bow down before you. That we are united in something so much greater, even though our world constantly pushes the buttons of what divides us. Help us to see the family as you have called it out and described it. Help us to see the mission as you have called it and described it. Help us to live that way for your glory and our good. In Jesus' name. Amen.